Welcome to the Not Just Ad Show, where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. So welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where we speak to B2B creators, founders and marketing leaders in the B2B creator space. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and I'm joined by Rob Illidge. He is the CEO of Vulse, which is an employee advocacy platform that works specifically with B2B brands. Rob, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. It's great. I'm a big fan of B2B and looking forward to chatting.
Great. So maybe you could tell me a little bit more and tell the listeners a little bit more about Vulse, how the idea came about, what you do, who you work with, and we'd love to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey with social media started around about 16 years ago, which seems like a long time. Social media has evolved massively in that time. So I went to university in America when Facebook first came out, and I would say was the real shift in terms of, social media usage, both personally and professionally. Obviously, there were other social networks available at the time, but Facebook did something, very different. And I just fell in love with social media and studying an international business degree. I then came back to the UK and worked solely in social media. And, back then, LinkedIn was very new, Facebook and then Instagram were kind of the go-to platforms, Twitter as well. But as we started to grow campaigns with clients, we started to see a bigger need in terms of building professional brands, personal brands. And I could see that kind of rise of kind of B2B creators happening. I think it was one of those times where it wasn't the right time at that point. I think we're definitely there now. But so Vulse effectively was born out of the challenges we saw with senior leaders, with the brands that we work with, wanting to be consistent on LinkedIn, wanting to share their kind of thought leadership, and ultimately, get more from their kind of personal brand.
No, great. So what would you see in terms of say typical B2B companies now that maybe traditionally 5 or 6 years, I guess we're going through this kind of evolution of trends of 10 years ago, it was digital transformation. Then it was, white papers, gated white papers. Now it's more say employee led or kind of finding out about the company culture, about the products, their ICPs and so on. What would you say as companies that you've worked with that have kind of went through that change or that transformation? How does it start and how do you see it changing and being successfully implemented?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the change in kind of professional networking and B2B led content, I believe that COVID in particular had a massive impact on it in terms of, I think brands then starting to realize that a lot of people kind of were working remotely. There's a lot more kind of need for an online presence, especially during that time. I feel like that kind of period of time led to this kind of spurt or growth of, B2B content creators and brands realizing that it's not just okay to kind of have a company page and to kind of rely on that and that, a lot of the power lies within kind of employees. I feel like there are certain brands that are maybe ahead of the time and they see the value in this. And I think even other networks like TikTok have shown the kind of the rise of the employee and the power that they can have. And we all know that people buy from people and we would rather interact with, a personal profile than a company page. I think a good example of it is brands like Tesco in particular, where they have people working in stores, creating their own content on TikTok, for example. They're creating kind of, huge followings. And that, is a good example for other brands to, kind of look up and see, how powerful that can be. I always say that it starts at the top with senior leaders. I think when you look to build kind of personal branding into company culture, I think it has to start at the top. We've seen challenges where marketing teams are desperate to kind of get their employees more involved. And there's obviously tactics and ways of doing that. But ultimately, teams have to be bought into it. And I think there's no point trying to get other employees to be on board when senior leaders aren't setting the bar. So I think it starts there, and I believe that content creation should be part of company culture and should be part of the day one experience. So even when you're going through a job interview for a brand, it should be part of that experience, and it should be explained that we are a company that loves to support our employees in terms of personal branding and B2B content creation. And then they follow it through with senior leadership as well. So senior leaders being active, being consistent, and ultimately kind of setting the tone.
Yeah. So the kind of the key takeaway that from what you see is like when it's most effective, it's kind of like led from a very senior level and it's encouraged then and people kind of partake in it actively then once it's like a top down, I suppose you could say from for want of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like marketing teams, they really want that support. Obviously, it amplifies everything that they're doing. If you have 100 people within the business, and you go from zero talking about it, or just a kind of the marketing team to 100, it's a huge amplification. It's huge multiples of potential reach. From a company culture perspective as well, it's great for even internal recruitment. So when you're looking to recruit, if employees are active, they're posting on LinkedIn about the wonderful things that the company does and the strong company culture, it really does help massively. I think where the marketing teams need support is through senior leaders, and we know
Yeah.
that people are very, very busy, and that's kind of where we come in terms of supporting senior leaders to still be consistent, to still show up with content, but not have to spend a lot of time doing it. And that then in kind of turn supports the senior leaders, then the marketing teams, and then it's just a natural kind of fit with the rest of the business where it kind of runs through to the rest of the employees. And we've seen it a lot in professional services in particular, where there'll be certain people within the business, let's say lawyers, and when some of them start to be active and start to gain engagement on LinkedIn, others kind of look up and think to themselves, well, why am I not getting kind of that praise, or why am I not getting that exposure in the press and things like that? And it really just helps identifying people within the business who are passionate about kind of B2B content creation, who are your champions, are definitely the first people to kind of work with and support them, rather than it kind of being a you have to do this kind of approach.
What do you say like to companies that maybe on the fence, they know that there's a lot of value here, but then they kind of think that it's risky. Somebody might do something or say something that might be associated with a brand and it could be risky. Do you come across that sometimes with enterprise organizations?
Definitely from an enterprise perspective, and more so for regulated businesses, especially in America and the UK. The positive is that they're actually thinking about this, so they're obviously aware of it and they understand the benefits of employee advocacy. There's always going to be hesitation, and I spoke to someone, and I wish I could remember who it was. I think it was an investor in the US, and they understood employee advocacy and they totally got the concept. What they said was, as a business, if your employee wins a Nobel Peace Prize, would you talk about it? Would you shout about it as a business? And the answer was, well, yes, of course you would. And the same goes for if they did something which was negative and it caused kind of negative press. You would care about what that employee was doing. So either way, businesses do care about what their employees do. So why not support them in doing it and help provide them with content that kind of fits with brand message? Of course, when you kind of get to enterprise level, it can be difficult in terms of the number of people that are being able to manage. And I feel like that's a great thing that Vulse does, is we take away that kind of that concern, that challenge of kind of matching tone of voice, matching brand messages at scale. There's lots of options out there, not just our platform, but there are options out there to kind of do this at scale, but also maintain that tone of voice. And I think you've got to have an element of allowing your employees to talk in their own tone. I think, you employ them to do a job, so they are clearly trusted within that organization. I think there has to be an element of allowing people to talk in their own tone of voice, to share content in a way that suits them.
How Vulse works is you have a platform. Maybe you can just explain a little bit more, like say to companies or marketing leaders that would be listening that are interested in this space. How exactly does your platform work for an enterprise organization, for example?
Yeah, so we spent the last 6 years looking at a tone of voice model and developing that tone of voice model so that content that can be shared at scale is matched to the tone of voice of employees, which not only saves time, but it creates really highly engaging, pieces of content. Um, that's some of the challenges that people have is time and kind of what to talk about and is it matched to tone. And we started to develop this kind of pre, open AI days and the AI that we kind of know now. And for us, the key is relevancy. So ensuring that content is relevant to that particular user. So yeah, we've been building this tone model for the last 6 years, and it's very powerful in understanding you as a user on a granular level and the things you like to talk about, the topics you're interested in, but also looking at kind of previous post data as well to understand how you format posts, the tone of voice that you have, and ultimately it's all about creating content quickly at scale that is relevant to that particular individual.
Yeah. So if we think of like now, even the way the shift of marketing in terms of B2B, like it's creator led and your platform is facilitating that. Can you give any examples that are in the public domain that are like you would say these are companies that are really leading the way in terms of this, in terms of the content they share, but like how they have the system built and like how they're doing it? And when you speak to clients, like any kind of points of reference, you say like these guys are doing it really well. They may not be in your industry, but they're doing it really well. And there's some learning you can take from that.
Yeah, so there's a great case study around Adidas in particular, who seem to be very active in terms of their employee advocacy and showing company culture as well. So when they're looking to recruit people to join their team, obviously they're a huge brand, but these people, may be looking at other brands to be working with as well. So it's still important for them to show, and the best way to do that is through your own employees rather than kind of recruitment ads or using agencies. That's a really, really strong case study in terms of showing how well you can utilize employee advocacy, but also how it can be used to kind of show off the inside of the brand and kind of what it's like behind the scenes. Yeah, I think Adidas is done really well. And there's also a software company called Uptick. They are incredible. We worked with Uptick previously. Yeah, you'll see almost all of their employees are active on LinkedIn, and it's really built into company culture. We also work with a company called Planet Testing. You have 1,000 employees globally, and it's these businesses that are kind of leading the way. They understand the power of their employees. They empower them. The best thing to do is to support people. Incentives are great as well. We see a lot of that, especially in sales and recruitment roles. Using our leaderboard, for example, to then incentivize employees, at the end of the month, who's been the top creator, that sort of thing. I think it creates some really healthy kind of internal competition. And then it kind of instills that, again, content creation into company culture. So yeah, those brands I think are great examples of how it can be done well. So I definitely recommend checking them out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things it comes back to then as well is around like B2B creators in particular. And it's like the marketing team see that there's a huge value there, but the challenge is that it doesn't necessarily show up in an attribution model and it can be difficult to measure. What are companies that are leading the way in this? How are they measuring effectiveness in business impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think every brand is different in terms of their KPIs. So some brands will kind of start from zero and they just want to see consistency. That's what it's all about. Obviously, the kind of the results in terms of revenue and leads and those sort of things are important. But for them, it's more about starting off and actually finding that kind of comfortable consistency is for some brands. They, like I say, they've started from nothing. The important thing for them is actually being consistent. So we report on those kind of metrics in terms of who are the most kind of active people, are they remaining consistent? Others will then have, kind of the kind of natural kind of metrics that you would look at. So, post frequency, for example, is engagement increasing? We have our own account scoring system as well, which looks at kind of 200 different signals in terms of how content is performing, are people engaging with it, is it improving as well? I think that's really important. And then the kind of brands that are, really looking to see an ROI from content will link the platform to their CRM, for example. So then they can see that whole journey in terms of, has that person engaged with my content? Have they connected with me? And then how has that kind of, developed into a lead and then obviously into sales? But yeah, I would say every brand is different. We could be speaking to or working with universities, for example, where their goal is to get students to secure a job after graduation. So education market is huge, and universities and business schools all need help. Their KPI is graduates, securing a job as quickly as possible. And you can do that quite easily in terms of, seeing that ROI. So for them, again, it's about getting students set up, getting them to be comfortable, getting them to be consistent, and then ultimately building that personal brand, and then securing a job at the end of it, which is quite easy to track. So yeah, I would say everybody's different, but there's always options depending on the kind of return you want to see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in terms of then CEOs, like you were saying initially at the start, it's like for it to work effectively, it's usually like from senior leadership and so on. What do you see in terms of if you have a senior leader and everyone has a busy day, they find it hard to find this time? Like, what kind of tips do you give if you're talking to someone that's like leading a company, or let's say it's a large enterprise, they're a VP of marketing, CFOs, CTO? What do you say to them, like if they're kind of maybe camera shy or they don't have much of a presence, but they see there's a value here, but they're like, look, I don't have time for this? Or what kind of tips would you give somebody like that, apart from using your platform, but like what actual tips in terms of how they plan their week and how they can kind of implement this into their schedule without it seeming like a heavy lift every time they have to do it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is if they're thinking about it, that's the first step, and it's a really positive one. I'd also say that there's always a solution. Time in particular, especially the day and age we're in now, content creation is a lot easier than it used to be in terms of content ideation, actually creating the content and then sharing it. Tools like ours and others are there to kind of save time, massively. In terms of being camera shy, there's different approaches for everything. You don't have to be, recording video. There are obviously other ways that you can do that as well without kind of video content. I would say finding your own comfortable consistency is really important, and just understanding that as the kind of CEO or kind of C-suite leader, you are kind of setting that bar, and by you doing that, others will follow. Others, within the organization will look up to you, and yeah, find your own comfortable consistency. Find what works for you. Um, that means that, let's say if you're posting once a week, but you then kind of move to 5 a week, it's a huge shift, and you might find yourself under a lot of pressure to do that. What I would do is say, if you are posting once a week, try 3, for example, or try 2, kind of those really small kind of increases, those small kind of margins are really, really important. Don't try and do too much kind of too soon. And planning is really important as well. Again, there's lots of tools out there where you can plan your content, whether it's planning a content schedule, being reactive, or just kind of, or you might be spending kind of some time during one day where you kind of plan everything and then you can just be reactive in terms of content. So yeah, there's lots of options available. And yeah, the first thing is getting started. And I would say planning is really important as well.
Yeah. What do you see as like as being most effective? I'll give you an example. For the CEO of Blackstone, I believe he's sharing a lot on LinkedIn in terms of him going for runs, basically wherever he is, wherever he's traveling, and he just takes like a minute video talking about his day while running, which seems quite authentic. But I wonder if you've any other examples in terms of like things like that you see of somebody like in a very, or someone in a very kind of like traditional regulated sector, but that they're sharing something that we probably may not have seen in a similar format a few years ago. Is there any other examples that you see like that in terms of the format and the way of content that you've seen that's kind of engaging and authentic?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that you obviously remembered him
Yeah.
is the key thing, is that, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Obviously, some industries are more regulated than others and can be a little bit more kind of archaic in the ways. And I think, again, we saw that during COVID in terms of certain industries not wanting their employees to kind of work remotely. And I think we've seen that shift, kind of massively. And I think what we got to think of is kind of the next generation of users, of buyers, creators as well. So yeah, I think just by doing something different, you stand out kind of massively, especially if you're in a regulated industry in particular. We've always found that personal content, outperforms anything kind of business related. I think from a society perspective, it's kind of what we expect now and we enjoy consuming. And it shows that kind of that C-suite, person is a person at the end of the day. They have their own hobbies, whether it's, running, rock climbing, everybody seems to be into right now, or paddle, something like that. Yeah, I think showing that human side is really, really important, not only from an external perspective, but also internally as well. You're showing people within the business that, it can be done. And I think showing anything like hobbies, running or whatever it might be, I think is a really nice kind of almost like personal piece of content, almost like behind the scenes. Yeah, I am a human as well, sort of thing. And it works really, really well. And all of the tests that we've done, we've always found that content that opens you up a little bit, where you might be a little bit more vulnerable, really works. And people buy from people, and they want to see that. They want to kind of consume and engage with that content. I'm a huge fan of the personal content, and we're seeing a massive shift to that now. So we're seeing a lot of people kind of put 60% of their kind of content is personal, and then the rest kind of company and industry related. So yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So we've just released our feature around suggested content. So what this will do is this will create content based on specific themes and sources of information. So it allows a user to basically become a thought leader more effectively. We solve that challenge of time. Research takes time, so we take away that challenge. So content is suggested to a user based off content theme, looking at things like what they've spoken about previously. So there's no kind of crossover, looking at kind of saturation of content as well. So ensuring that they are the first person to talk about that particular topic. And following there, we're looking at competitor analysis as well. So really understanding what competitors are doing, what their employees that are talking about, but then also identifying content gaps based off what people are not talking about. So if there's a particular topic that, let's say, comes out today as a news article, we want to be able to share that with a brand to say, this is really important within your industry. It looks like your competitors are not talking about it. So here's, a great opportunity to kind of stand out. And again, it's saving that time, but also providing relevant content. And then generally as a business, just kind of scaling globally. We're obviously UK born, but we've grown massively in the US. So yeah, looking forward to more of that this year and kind of beyond.
Great. And maybe you could share with us then some of your predictions for the future in terms of B2B creator-led content.
I think I just see a massive kind of rise of B2B led creator content. I think we've already seen the kind of influencer campaigns already started. This is something I predicted 7 years ago, but then again, I also predicted the iPod and never did anything with it as a 13-year-old boy because of shame. But yeah, I could see this coming, years ago in terms of B2B led influencers. Now is just the beginning, I would say. I say we're right at the kind of early stages. There's a huge market there. I think video as well is going to be massively important. And I think for those people who kind of, like you mentioned, camera shy, again, there's so many options these days with, creating content where you don't have to be kind of front and center, but you could still, it could be an avatar or it could be something else. There's lots of options to not necessarily, you have to do a kind of piece to camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, video, I think massively, I see it kind of rise again on LinkedIn, especially. And yeah, I'm just excited personally to see more B2B content creators, to see more content. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And if anyone wants to find you, where are you normally active? Where can they reach you?
Just LinkedIn. LinkedIn
Okay.
is my go-to. Yeah, or yeah, Vulse.co, or you can find me personally on LinkedIn.
Great. Great. Rob, thanks very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.